Recently, I watched a YouTube video in full that was titled Philosophy YouTube is Broken. And I wanted to check it out because of that title itself. And, I am a philosophy YouTube producer with my own channel. So I thought I better see what's going on here. And it's, very interesting, provocative video that I'm going to respond to in at least two videos. Today, I'm going to do one that looks at the claims and ideas, arguments made in the video itself, and then I'll do at least one, maybe more. I certainly want to talk about how it impacts or affects me, because I'm a bit of an outlier, perhaps, when it comes to what's being talked about. And I don't usually watch a lot of other people's content, but this one by Michael Burns, well worth checking out. I'll put a link to it below, and you can check it out for yourself. I'll also mention that I appear, or rather an interview with me appears towards the end of the video, although, lots of other philosophy YouTubers as well are in the video. And it's really worth checking out and thinking about. So part of the idea that's articulated very early on in it by Michael Burns is that there seems to be a contradiction in using YouTube to make videos that are using philosophy and critical theory to examine cultural and political systems. That's not all that it's about, but that's a good centering idea. The broader idea is doing philosophy on YouTube as such, philosophy in a variety of different ways, including what I do in my own videos. And so I'm not going to talk about myself all that much, hopefully, in this particular video, but just to give you, an idea of where I currently am with my philosophy-oriented channel. So I've been on YouTube for about 14 years at this point, maybe a little bit longer. I've got, a pretty decent subscriber base, 165,000 at this point, which is a drop in the bucket compared to more popular channels. I've had about 16 million views of my videos. I've released something like 3,700 videos and a whole bunch of live streams as well. And they've been watched for 2.3 million hours, which, if you do the calculations, amounts to something like 262 years. So that avatar of me on the screen has existed for about 5 times as long as I have, if you just put the minutes together. Now, I was watching this and taking down a number of points that I want to respond to. We'll see where they go. I've just got the points, and I'm going to see what thoughts arise for me on the way. So Burns begins by saying that, listen, this is not just about, we could say that meme where somebody is criticizing the medieval economy and there's a guy popping up and saying, yet you engage in the economy, how funny that is, right? It's not about that sort of gotcha sort of criticism. He talks about critiquing capitalism on a capitalist site. So anybody can make criticisms like that. The broader concern is a real one. Balancing creative and intellectual goals with the kind of metrics that YouTube not only relies upon, but really promotes to creators. You may not know this, but YouTube has all of these videos that they've produced and workshops and things you can participate in. They even have like an AI that's specifically set up for YouTube, and all the focus is on metrics like, how many clicks are you getting? How long are you retaining an audience? What the trending topics are. And YouTube is ultimately, at this point in time, about making money. They can give lip service to all sorts of other things, but they're part of the, Google conglomerate. And so, they're there to ultimately funnel money from advertisers into Google, with creators getting a portion of it. So Michael was asking, all right, given that that's the case, is the project of doing philosophy on YouTube, and I think he's asking this both for individual creators, content producers as they call them, and also for, let's talk about this sort of vague, big conglomerate that is called, philosophy YouTube. Is it sustainable in the long run? And now notice that something could be sustainable as a community without being sustainable for individual members of that community, so long as there's enough continuity, right? So people could try to make a living on YouTube doing philosophy, work for 5 years, and then fizzle out. And that's not sustainable for them. But if there's enough people going in and out at the same time, the community can go on more or less indefinitely. And I think that one of the assumptions that's being made here is that we're talking about people whose income is primarily coming from YouTube ad revenue or other things that you can get, like sponsorships, or associated, income streams like merchandise. And I don't think that's actually the case it's certainly not the case for everybody who's doing philosophy on YouTube. For me, it's part of my, revenue, but it's a significant but not sizable amount, right? I don't depend on YouTube as my primary source of income, but there are a lot of people who do. So we can, note an important difference there, and we have to ask this question: is it actually sustainable? And we can also ask about another kind of sustainability. Can you wake up every morning and look at yourself in the mirror and think, I'm not a sellout, I'm doing the right thing? Or are you going to eventually become corrupted in the process? And this is a very important question. So he also notes, and this is early on, and this gives us, one of the reasons why he produced this video in the first place, and then, released it and did a premiere and had a live chat, which you should check out as well. So a lot of the most successful creators in YouTube, the philosophy space, have been having problems of different sorts. And he brings up ContraPoints who got into some issues on Twitter, making allegiances and commitments clear, and people kind of didn't like that, and eventually she closed down her Twitter account. And there's some repercussions to that. Now, successful. How are we measuring success? Like, number of views, whether somebody's actually earning a living at it. I like to think that my channel, although certainly, hasn't had experienced the astronomical growth of some of these other philosophy channels, has been successful in doing YouTube philosophy. But if we're talking about people who are, number one, trying to earn a living through it and are aiming at getting mass audiences, that's probably the measure of success that we're talking about. And they are running into problems. And some of these are, you could say, inherent in the nature of trying to do philosophy accurately, rigorously, in a spirit of truth, and do so for a mass audience. It's a similar problem to what you have with other media formats, but some of it is also due to the fact that you are trying to earn a living with it, and so you don't want to alienate those viewers, right? Because you need them to keep sending money YouTube's way, which results in you getting some money yourself. And I think that, he talks about, well, what is philosophy? And he talks about a number of differing approaches to that question. And, it's something that in the very first days of Intro to Philosophy, we tell them, hey, there's multiple ways to do philosophy, at least if we're not being ideologues and trying to push one single thing. We often talk about, love of wisdom and beginning and wonder, and that's all great. Epictetus says it begins in realizing that people disagree about things and trying to figure out, well, who's right and who's wrong. There's many other ways we could begin philosophy. Albert Camus, famously in the myth of Sisyphus, says that the absurd can strike us at any moment, and then we might need to philosophize, right? So there's many different ways of conceiving of the philosophical project in its origins, in its methods, in its spirit, in how it's done. There's other things that we can say, yeah, that's not really philosophy, or if it is, it's more parasitic and taking philosophy and packaging it in a way that debases it and gets away from what real philosophy would be. And I don't need to name any names. I mean, you can figure out what sort of channels we're talking about or what authors we might have in mind. But there's a wide gap. And then there's things that kind of straddle the middle. If you're doing video essays that are very glitzy, high production, trying to stir up drama, are you really doing philosophy? There's a debate to be had there, we could say. And, so we've got a lot of differing approaches. I would say that, my stuff is probably at one extreme. I don't do a lot of high production. I don't do market research. I barely use the analytics that are provided to me. And I just keep churning out what I think to be reliable, decently articulated discussions of philosophy with sometimes a little bit of heavy metal mixed in, or cat pictures, or discussions of my past, the Sadler stories, or science fiction and fantasy stuff. But for the most part, it's focused on philosophy. And then there's all sorts of other people doing other things, and that's all, within the scope of YouTube philosophy. I thought something really interesting in the discussion. So here's a point that I really think we want to think about. He talks about many channels doing something that in a way is anti-philosophical while doing it under the guise of talking about philosophy or referencing philosophy. So he talks about, what he said is, many channels are performing moral superiority to others, inviting the audience to partake in identifying with that moral superiority. So because you do theory, whatever the hell that is, means a lot of different things, or you're studying philosophy or something else that's, related to the life of the mind, you are a better person. Sort of like walking around with a famous book like James Joyce's Ulysses and going to the cafe and opening it up and oohing and eyeing over how cool it is. By the way, I'm not a fan of Joyce. I quit reading Ulysses pretty early on because I was like, I'm not going to waste my time on this. And I read one volume in Proust's, masterpiece, and I was like, that's enough for me. But there's lots of people who are performative in that way. And, if you are talking about the topics of the hour and, saying, what would Immanuel Kant say about this? Or you're, focusing on Stoicism because it's hot right now. It's been hot for about, 15 years or so. And you're like, doing videos about how the Stoics got things wrong, but you're actually getting the Stoics wrong. Or you're doing videos about how the Stoics got everything right, but you're also still getting the Stoics wrong. You're performing, right? That is performative, and it's essentially turning philosophy into a commodity product, and one that is a luxury product, which is supposed to provide a certain kind of prestige. And I think that people have been doing this long before the internet was out. But I think that having the internet, and specifically, YouTube and other venues connected to that, we might think about philosophy Twitter and how performative a lot of the posts that people put there are. It gave a greater scope. Anybody can do it now, right? So, somebody who I do a lot of work on, Hegel, I think that the majority of the people who talk about Hegel online have barely read him and don't understand him well, but he's, one of these thinkers who has a text with an aura, as I've talked about. So I think there's really something to that, and maybe the more relevant or politically important the philosophy that you're doing is, maybe there's a greater tendency of falling into that performative side, both as the creator and as the audience or viewer. So that's a point well worth keeping in mind and exploring. That doesn't mean that anytime somebody is talking about philosophy or bringing up philosophical texts that they're just engaging in performativity. We don't want to be cynical in the modern sense like that. But, this is well worth thinking about. Shifting topic, he talks about YouTube itself. What goals does YouTube have? And this is something that has changed over time. When YouTube was fresh and new, it was a place to upload your videos, and it was really kind of, cool to see what was available, and people were doing all sorts of experiments with it. Some schools that had the money were using video recording of their professors and uploading those things. Yale got into that with the Yale courses. YouTube actually had something called YouTube EDU for quite a while before they, quietly phased it out. I know because my videos were included in it, my course videos, right? And that was a good thing to do. And there were all sorts of really cool kind of experiments. I remember channels that haven't really done anything new for a long time that were engaging in philosophical work. Some were professors, some were just, people who had an interest in philosophy, and it was great. And then, of course, YouTube gets acquired by Google, and a lot more turns into we want to see return on investment. And with Google, they had the possibility of connecting it with Google advertising. Google's a juggernaut in that respect. The majority of their money traditionally has been coming from advertising, right? So what happens then? Well, not only was there a you could say, inherent bias towards certain kinds of videos and away from others. If you're doing philosophy, unless you really do some song and dance for the audience, you're probably not going to get the kind of videos that makeup tutorials and cat videos and guys doing stupid stunts are going to get. Or, goofy gurus who have it all figured out, who, if you actually trust your life to them, you'll screw your life up. Those sort of things, even before Google acquired YouTube, that was getting a lot more views. And okay, that's fine, because, nobody says that everybody has to study philosophy or be interested in it. But what is the goal? What is the teleology involved that structures everything, right? If you've got an end, the means are going to be the means appropriated to that end, and some means may drop out, right? The goal is to keep viewers engaged. And why is it so important to keep viewers engaged? because that's how you sell advertising, and that's where the money comes from to keep the whole thing going. So YouTube is looking for drawing eyeballs in there and keeping them on. And so are forms of social media. Basically, anybody who's got that sort of business model is going to be doing precisely that. So is that going to be in conflict with doing philosophy competently, in a well-informed way, in a way that doesn't lie about stuff or oversimplify or pretend that you're giving an adequate treatment when you're not, create unnecessary drama? Well, this is where the model itself can become kind of corrupting. And, YouTube itself is not a monolith. It can be used in many different ways. And that's what we've done, right? It can be used to teach philosophy. It can be used to create videos about why you shouldn't study philosophy. It can be used to promote the works of Immanuel Kant. It can be used to create videos saying why Immanuel Kant was such a bastard and his ideas are stupid and nobody should think about them. It can be used to talk about, why Stoicism is so amazing. Maybe, hopefully, you get Stoicism right when you do that. Or it could be about all sorts of, sort of standard fare criticisms of it, or utilitarianism, or feminism of different sorts, or pick whatever you want, right? You can do all sorts of things with YouTube. You can create videos like I do, where I get up in front of a chalkboard and talk about something for 15 to 20 minutes in a core concept, or, shoot a video like here about a science fiction author whose works have philosophical implications. Or you can put all sorts of stuff together with really cool music and fades and pictures and your voiceover, and you can also have great conversations and do interviews. All of this is stuff that we can do, right? There are many different possibilities. YouTube, as he pointed out, can also function to democratize in a certain way. I remember back when I was first starting, I was like, well, who's going to want to watch me? I'm a nobody, compared to these other people who are at Ivy League universities and have that social prestige behind them. And people watched my videos, and then they commented, and they're like, this is really good stuff. Thanks for doing this. This is helpful to me. And, I wouldn't have really had that sort of opportunity, even though I was always somebody who's, scrapping and chipping away at the academic institution and trying stuff out, even if people said, no, you can't do that. You're not good enough to be in that. I would do it, and then people could, like it or not. YouTube blew that wide open. So for a while, before all the algorithms took over, it was kind of like, hey, if you got good content, it goes to the top because people are watching it and sharing it and commenting on it. And, that's really great. It opened up the door to lots and lots of people who otherwise might never have had a hearing. And I think that it's still a possibility today, but it's much harder to break in than it was 10 years ago. Depending on platform, so this is yet another point that we want to make. When you're dependent on a platform like YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or any of these tech companies, you, in a certain sense, own your content, but really they own your content, and they can make it go away at any point in time. I'll mention one YouTube person who's also a full-time professor, great scholar of Chinese philosophy and literature, Brian Van Norden, who's at Vassar, who I've met, by the way. He's a really nice guy. He had all of these great lectures up on YouTube about Chinese philosophy, didn't have them backed up on a hard drive somewhere. Somehow he got dinged for, whatever it was, maybe copyright infringements. YouTube took them all down. He couldn't get access to them. It was only because he talked about it on Twitter, and then all sorts of people were going after YouTube on Twitter saying, hey, what are you doing to this guy? There's no way he's doing copyright infringement, that YouTube reinstated it. And then he immediately downloaded all those videos and backed them up. YouTube can do that to anybody, anytime. Twitter can bump you out at any time. Facebook can bump you out at any time. And then you lose a good portion of your audience, and it's not clear how you're going to get it back. And it doesn't matter what platform you move to. There's this, ongoing process that Cory Doctorow has labeled enshittification, which involves the, move away from an innovative, open kind of structure that's really good and rewarding to, let's make money with this, that affects the people who are creators. So there's a kind of vulnerability that we all have, and that can make people play it safe, or it can keep them from talking about certain matters, right? The Palestinian crisis, what should we do about that? There are people who wind up getting, mobbed and canceled, and however you want to put it. And they say, I just don't want to do this. And then they move off of that particular platform. So there's a lot of issues that arise because of that. On the other hand, we could say that there's also this, it starts to seep into you. I know I've been subject to this temptation. You're like, man, look at these other people and their growth in their platform or their channel. If I were talking about the stuff that they're talking about, maybe I would see that kind of growth. And wouldn't it be great? And you can even justify it to yourself by saying, and then my message would get out there and it would reach more people. And that would be a good thing for philosophy. Maybe it would. It depends on what you do with philosophy on the way in that rise, don't you? Now, he points out, Michael Burns, that philosophers, long before the rise of the internet, he goes all the way back to Socrates in this case, he points out that philosophers have been critics and skeptics about technology, about culture, about systems and platforms, media, for a long time. You can think about Socrates and his articulated, ironically, in writing, his concerns about writing over speech that wind up becoming still so relevant that Derrida could, mine that for his On Grammatology in the late 60s, right? So, these concerns have been with us for a very long time. And then, one of the things that Burns also talked about, I realize I'm jumping from topic to topic, but hopefully you can follow, because he does, in the video, cover a number of topics. YouTube has a lot of potential to be used as something that could be quite helpful, that could fill in a ever-growing gap. And what is that? So in our popular culture, which he's not talking about so much, but in our popular culture and media, not a lot of people doing philosophy. It's usually done pretty piss poor. Occasionally we'll get a show like The Good Place that does a little bit of that stuff, but I wasn't impressed with the show myself. A lot of times the depictions of things are, pretty bad. What about the academic world, right? The university, that's supposed to be like the flagship. Well, universities are not what they used to be. Just to give you an example of one that's just down the road from me, where I occasionally teach, if you walk on campus, all you got to do is walk in the buildings to see where the priorities are. The nursing building is beautiful. The business building is amazing. The dentistry building, the law school, the engineering building, we could go on and on and on. They're all bright and shiny and new. What are the places where they teach the humanities? Like, they're all pits. They're all run down. The technology that's been placed in the classroom is not quite as great as the stuff in the new places. Everything's kind of dingy. The lighting isn't wonderful. There's chalkboards at least, which is great for me. Even the science buildings on that campus are like that. It shows you where the priorities are, right? The universities are not about philosophy. Philosophy departments are closing, as are foreign language departments, as are, all sorts of others, including in the sciences, the hard sciences and the soft sciences. We're in a real crisis. And it's getting more and more expensive for students to go to university. We're looking at what may be a demographic cliff fairly soon. And what can step in and fill in that gap? Well, YouTube and other platforms as well, but it's YouTube so much. That's part of what I've been doing with my work these 14 years. People who, either are in university and studying, but their professors aren't any good, or they need something extra, or they don't get to this particular work, or lifelong learners, people who were in college or university before but had to drop out. They watch videos, and they watch all sorts of people's videos because that became available. They don't have to send off to buy the great courses, which was always kind of an elitist thing. It really did democratize online education to have YouTube, right? So he talks about YouTube philosophy providing a parallel educational apparatus. What a wonderful phrase. I will mention too, that's at the point where they cut to our interview, and I talk a little bit about the comments that I got from people when I started producing YouTube philosophy content. There is also a great danger of, and we've talked about this already, corruption. And here Burns has another great phrase. I don't remember if it was him or one of his interlocutors because he's cutting back and forth between interviews. The spirit of the algorithm. It's easy to become infected with the spirit of the algorithm and to think, oh, I really do need to raise these metrics. I need to raise the watch time. I need to hold viewers' attention. So I better do a little song and dance every 5 minutes so that they stay attentive. I can't just stand in front of a chalkboard. I got to have a joke or something every once in a while, or criticize some political figure, or have a cool graphic that we cut to. If I don't do that, then I'm not going to keep those eyeballs on. Now, if you're going to do philosophy like that, you're probably not going to do very good philosophy, are you? Or if you're thinking, man, what topics are top of mind right now? It's one thing if you're like, hey, we have a philosophy show and we talk about current events. It's another when you're like, what does Google tell me the, top topics that people are discussing are right now? Let me make some videos about that. Or, it gets kind of incestuous when it's YouTubers talking about other YouTubers or other people in philosophy, social media. That is a form of corruption that draws you away from being able to, we talked about sustainability, to sustain your stance as a philosopher. And when it's happening, it's not like you don't know it, but you think that, sort of like that meme with from Arrested Development where they're, it's the couple and they're saying, everybody thinks that they'll be able to do X, Y, Z, and it never pans out. And then she's like, well, should we not do it then? And he's like, well, for us, it might work out. No. If you think that you're above the possibility of corruption or just a little bit is okay for you, you're being corrupted. And you probably know it because you're cutting corners. And that's how channels become, let's say, algorithmized. I was going to say commercialized, but, we're all commercializing something. But to give into the algorithm, to say, I'm going to essentially change my content to fit what it is that YouTube is looking for me to be, that's a problem. Are there alternatives? Another really great part of the video was this clip of an interview with Jared Henderson, who said something really brilliant, I think. It's a great comparison. He said, I think of myself as a kind of virus inside of YouTube. It's a platform that's optimized for gaming and entertainment creators. I have to hijack those cells enough to inject myself into it, but not enough to kill the host. We could also add, but not enough where I become just another cell, right? But this notion of taking a platform that wants us to just be churning out content that is going to entertain and keep eyeballs stuck to the screen, but we're going to do something different with it. We're going to educate. We're going to promote discussion. We're going to help people live a better life by engaging with philosophy. That isn't what YouTube is looking for. You may find YouTube executives who are like, yes, I love to read Marcus Aurelius in my spare time, and philosophy is so wonderful. I remember when I had a class back as an undergraduate, and it changed my life. And you're like, yeah, bullshit. Yeah, you're just an executive. You're doing what you're doing. They can do that, but we can keep on doing what we're doing. That notion of being a virus inside of YouTube, YouTube hasn't killed Jared Henderson yet, hasn't killed me, and my stuff is probably even more virusy, more, the immune system would take it out, because I'm not trying to do anything glitzy. I'm not actually trying to, invade the cells and take over the entertainment and gaming stuff. I don't gamify a damn thing, and yet I can keep on churning out content that people want to watch. And so can others, right? So I think that's a good, good thing to keep in mind. And it can help us to be a little bit less pessimistic about the platform. Another thing that, as we get to the end of this, that gets discussed by Michael Burns is the problem of community. I have to admit, I'm not really great on this. I don't watch a lot of other philosophy YouTubers. I mean, I interact with them occasionally. Sometimes I go on their channels, and I share their stuff if I've actually checked it out. But I'm not constantly engaging with other people. But, the traditional model of philosophy has indeed been something collaborative. It's not just the sage who retires up to the mountaintop and hangs out by himself. There's a world that we live in, and that world includes other people who are engaging in philosophy. We want to have dialogue and conversation, not just isolation. And Michael worries about, by engaging in YouTube so much, whether we're, fighting the good fight and not reducing our content just to stuff to get clicks, or whether we're like giving in to those temptations, maybe we are getting out of touch with other people. I think that's a valid worry. That's a valid concern. Maybe we do have to be attentive to that. And he points out something that a lot of online comments that you get, a lot of the engagement is pretty awful. And, I think there's three routes you can go with that. One is you can take it to heart and be like, I suck, I should stop doing this. That's not going to be sustainable. He talks about desensitization. So if you're one of the people who lets people say all the crappy stuff that they say online and you let it remain there, you better develop a thick skin, in which case you're not going to be engaging with them. Or you can do what I do, which is if people are jerks online, I block them, right? I used to, when I first started doing AMAs, I'd have like jerks coming in who wanted to argue about this or that, in stupid ways. Arguing in intelligent ways, that's fine, right? Arguing like a jackass, no, that's not cool. Or they'd be Nazis and they want to make all sorts of racial complaints and things like that, I just blocked them. And, I almost never have people like that showing up in my AMAs anymore because they're all on the blocked list, right? But that does kind of, narrow the engagement that you're going to have with other people, right? So Burns ends on talking about the idea that we, as individual content producers in YouTube, focused on philosophy with some sort of philosophy background, trying to do a decent job in communicating it to other people, providing them resources, we can do that, but we also, as he says, we need to think about strengthening each other. How do we support each other in this endeavor? I think that is a really valid concern. It's not one that I have an answer for. And I don't think there's an answer provided in the video either. But maybe that's something that we need to preserve as an open question. Maybe that's something that we need to have some ongoing discussions about. So I am going to shoot another video that is, it's going to take into account these points, but is going to be much more exclusively focused on my channel and what I think my role is in doing philosophy on YouTube, online. Some of these things apply well to me, some of them don't. I've already talked a little bit about my own stuff here, but I wanted to stick to the more general points. So I would go and check out the original video, which is well worth viewing in its whole and looking at the chat on the side. And if you have things that you want to contribute here, intelligent, well thought out comments, certainly welcome. And look out for the upcoming other video. And maybe I'll have Michael Burns on my own channel. He had me on his to discuss some of these matters further later on down the line.